Hello, everybody. I'm Gabe Haynes, a student in the Asian Politics course of Poly 252, and I bring to you this evening a presentation about the roles of women in Japanese society. And I've chosen this because, as we moved further throughout the 21st century, women have been increasingly more um, vigilant in how they are perceiving certain rights and how they should be granted such. And we've seen the progression of women in society all throughout the world. But Japan specifically has been an interesting one because they elected their first Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, earlier this year. And it's important to understand how far women have come in Japanese society because Japan, as we know, is ranked, unfortunately, as one of the lowest countries of a democracy that um, does not really accept social change when it comes to women. And that's what this presentation is all about. So here's a quote from Alice Paul: "There will never be a new world order until women are a part of it." So with the electoral victory and inauguration of PM Takaichi as the first female prime minister in Japan, it's important to understand just how far women have, or just how women have been treated in Japanese society, and what the future could look like with this historical moment. Will Japan become more relaxed with women in these roles? Will conservative principles help women become more powerful? And could foreign leaders influence Japanese society? So women's progression really begins during the era of World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945. So general social roles. During Japan's involvement, women were expected to support the nation either through patriotic motherhood, wartime labor, or household management. Japanese society had promoted the values of, quote, good wife, wise mother ideology. This idea had reinforced the idea that woman's primary duty during the war effort was to serve the Japanese Empire, either by childbirth and domestic loyalty. Multiple women eventually joined wartime organizations, and these organizations included Greater Japan Women's Association, Community Mobilization, and Civil Defense. Next is the increasing need for labor and workforce changes. As men were drafted, women were increasingly mobilized into the workforce. They typically were assigned positions in factories, munitions production, and textile mills. And although their labor was essential for the war effort, it often brought low wages, dangerous work conditions, and long work hours. The state had framed this labor rather as a national sacrifice and was not viewed as a step toward equality. So continuing, we move to the education and military support roles of World War II. In schools, girls' education was often redirected toward Japan's patriotic instruction, agriculture, home economics, and basic military support skills such as nursing and first aid. During the war, multiple women had served as nurses for the Imperial Japanese Empire and Army. Unfortunately, harsh and traumatic conditions were faced, especially when battles were taking place. And next is women on the home front. Throughout the war, women often were subjected to bombings. Examples were the explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, underlying food shortages, and forced evacuations as the war intensified. Mothers and young girls would typically participate in various exercises that often dealt with civil defense, emergency aid during air raids, and fire brigades. In the later years of the war, high school girls were mobilized to dig trenches, build fortifications, and support military operations. So, now we get to the end of World War II, and now we move on from 1945 on up to present. So, war ends in 1945 with the release of explosives onto the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like I mentioned, and the death of German Chancellor Adolf Hitler. The Allied powers had conquered the Axis coalition in a 6-year conflict. But what happened to women in Japanese society post-World War II? So now we look at the post-war impact and revolution in Japan. After Japan's defeat, women gained new political rights. The biggest accomplishment was the right to vote in 1945. Unfortunately, several wartime burdens and traumas would remain unacknowledged and hidden away for decades. The suffering of a comfort woman that began during the war effort soon became an international issue in the 1990s. And because of this, the historical re-evaluation of Japan's wartime actions was soon put into action. So now we look at the 21st century of women's progression, the social status and expectation moving forward. So several traditional gender norms, such as the norm of good wife, wise mother model, continue to influence expectations about women in society. Next is Japan's governmental policies and the womanomics idea. The pursuit of the federal government's womanomics strategy seeks the goal of aiming the increased presence of female labor force participation as well as leadership representation. Next is the efforts to improve women's rights and safety. The obstacles of sexual harassment and workplace discrimination still remain widespread even as protections were instituted, and Japan's Me Too movement has influenced policy debates. However, it is often seen as a smaller branch compared to that of the United States branch beginning during the term of U.S. President Donald Trump in 2017. Next is the shifting attitudes. So younger generations in Japan hold more egalitarian views and have increasingly challenged the traditional gender role values. And lastly is the evaluation of political representation in Japanese politics. Unfortunately, Japan continues to seek low among developed democracies in women's political representation. But we did see in Prime Minister Fumio Kishida that he did have women in his cabinet, though not very much. So now we move on to Sanae Takaichi's victory and the future of women. So in October 2025, Mrs. Takaichi was elected by Japan's parliament as the country's first female prime minister. Her win came after she secured the leadership of the Liberal Democratic Party, which is the biggest political party in Japan, in an internal vote. She had received 237 votes in the lower house, just enough for a majority. And her election was made possible by a coalition deal between the LDP party and the right-wing Japan Innovation Party. So implications and analysis for gender roles. And while her victory was symbolic, she began to have a more conservative agenda be implemented. So Takaichi is widely viewed as an ultra-conservative figure in Japanese politics. She opposes major gender equal reforms, and she is against same-sex marriage and allowing married couples to keep separate surnames. She's also opposed to the idea of female imperial succession and has sought to maintain a traditionalist vision of family and gender roles. Next is the broader political and social shift. So Takaichi's leadership could be a turning point for conservative and nationalist policies, especially given her ideological alignment with former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and acceptance of U.S. President Donald Trump's more aggressive foreign policy views. And as Dr. Ding had noted before, a great way to think of this is Takaichi wants to essentially, quote, make Japan great again, just like how U.S. President Donald Trump wants to make America great again. And for women's rights, her premiership is a double-edged sword. Her victory represents a milestone in representation, but not necessarily a victory for feminist policy. So now we move on to the future of women. So the future of Japanese women after Takaichi's win. And up there you see from Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who unfortunately was assassinated a few years ago. And there she is recently with U.S. President Donald Trump during his second term, when he completed his first major foreign tour, which was the traveling throughout Asia. And there he and Takaichi had met for a summit. So the future of Japanese women after Takaichi's win. So first, it represents a milestone for representation. Her election is a powerful symbol that women can reach the highest political office in Japan, a country where female political representation has historically lagged. Next is certain limits of symbolism. Unfortunately, Takaichi's conservative views show that representative breakthroughs don't always translate into progressive social change. Next is the impact on gender policy. Given her policy stances, important gains like family law reform or LGBTQ rights may not advance under her leadership, or could even face resistance. And lastly is the long-term significance. Whether her premiership improves gender equality depends heavily on both her choices and pressure from civil rights groups and civil society. So to conclude, despite a victory of the first female Japanese prime minister and more progression, Japan still has a whole lot of work to do in ensuring Japan gets more equal, to ensure Japanese women get more equal representation. Japan doesn't have to be a traditionalist form of democracy, but one that accepts social change and advancements of more civil rights and the embracement of feminism, which is very important because women should be able to have the equal rights as men do. And if Japan wants to have a major breakthrough, like I said, they're going to have to work harder to push for more civil rights for women, even as conservative groups may push back. So thank you for viewing this presentation.